Could I acknowledge, obviously, Michaela Emma King, the CEO of Victorian Council of Social Services. Andrew Jacomos, I haven't seen Andrew here today. Hi Andrew, great to see you here and I acknowledge your presence. And Kate Jenkins, the Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commissioner. I need to say this, Kate. Victoria Police we got ourselves into quite a difficult situation with some issues that started 6 or 7 years ago in the Flemington area. Ended up in a very, very difficult and protracted federal court case, and Kate's leadership as the Human Rights Commissioner, together with Victoria Police, has got us into a much, much better place. And I suspect there's people in this room that have read our document. Equality is not always the same. And I do, again, thank you, Kate, for your help in, as I say, getting us to a far, far better place than we might have been. So thank you. Thank you. Do you want to get up and say a few words, Kate? No. Okay, I'm going to focus on some issues around family violence for the next 20 or so minutes. And the theme of this conference, setting the agenda, really is capturing the essence about what I want to say in this space. Specifically, I want to explore how we can collectively lead change and tackle one of the key policy issues we face in Victoria, being family violence. I suspect that some of you have already heard me talk about this issue. It's been one of the most insidious crimes in this state. Not sure if people in the room understand this, that 50% of every assault in this state happens in the family home. Some of the very worst injuries that are inflicted on women and children happen in the family home. So it is an issue that's not only very dear to my heart, but is really the essence of my job, about keeping the community safe. So it's not surprising that I do focus on it. This morning, I understand the Premier made an announcement in relation to a $30 million investment into family violence. Last night, when this started to filter through that the Premier was going to make some announcements, it made me extremely nervous. Wasn't quite sure what my speech was going to look like. Wasn't sure whether I was going to raise some issues about lack of investment in particular areas, and it was going to be resolved this morning. But I do welcome the Premier's announcement, and I'm sure it will make a significant difference to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. I also, in the interest of bipartisanship, I need to welcome the announcement of a Royal Commission into family violence by the opposition. I mentioned this to Fiona McCormack about 10 minutes ago. 40 years I've been in Victoria Police, and never once before have I ever heard family violence being mentioned in the lead up to an election. So we are starting to move, and things are starting to improve. So they are significant commitments by both parties at this time of budgetary restraint, and a time when we all, everyone in this room, must find creative and innovative resolutions to complex problems. And rest assured, the family violence is one of our most complex issues. But I think if we tackle 4 key issues, we'll go a long way to helping people in our community. But they're not small issues, I made that point. They are large and difficult and go to the very heart of our culture and cut across institutional boundaries. So let me pose a number of questions to the group. Do we, as the Premier, challenge you this morning, take a whole of community approach to this issue, where not only government or specific agencies, the courts or police are held accountable, but do we also hold every Victorian accountable? Do we need to overhaul our whole system? Do we need to put the victim at the absolute centre of this process? Do we need to integrate our systems to improve our response? I know the answer to that. And how do we change our culture to change the way that men in our community treat women and children? So, before I begin tackling some of those issues, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. It is upon their ancestral lands that this place is built, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Okay, I want to take you on a journey. I want you all to imagine something with me. A young woman calls police in halting English and asks to speak to someone. She's nervous. She comes from a Middle Eastern country. She manages to communicate to the officer that she's scared. Her life is in danger. The first thing she needs is a translator. And after a number of phone calls, police eventually find one. A petite, softly spoken woman, she whispers to the translator that she came to Australia 5 years ago after marrying her husband. Through her translator, this brave woman says that her husband started abusing her on her honeymoon. And she describes in detail the hitting, the kicking and the humiliation she suffers on a daily basis. She tells the police officer she wants to leave her husband, take her daughter to a safe place, away from the violence and the humiliation she is experiencing every day. But the woman has limited options, and as she explains to our member, she has little or no English, no job, no money, and no family or community support in Victoria. She's stuck. Now this is a picture many of us have seen. Now picture our response. Can we find a safe accommodation for her and her daughter? Yep, but only sometimes. Can we give her easy access to a comprehensible and supportive legal system? Many would argue no. Can we ensure the full range of community sector support is focused on her situation so she has options to leave this abusive and degrading relationship forever? Sometimes. It depends on where she lives. We don't have basic services for women and children available 24/7. In fact, some services are only accessible 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And does anyone in this room really believe that family violence occurs between 9 and 5 in the day? I suspect not. If this young woman came to Victoria Police for protection, could we be 100% sure that we could keep her safe? I think the evidence is no. So who's responsible? And I'll argue we all are. The government, the agencies, the community, every single individual in our community. The buck stops with each and every one of us. We do need to all take responsibility, to challenge ourselves, to test ourselves, and to hold all parts of our system accountable. Because it may be that the entire system needs an overhaul. From start to finish, we may need to change the way we deal with victims. Now let me explain why I feel this way. And if you don't mind, I'll refer to a matter, a story of my own. Whilst I don't have hadn't personally been a victim of family violence, a very close friend of mine has. And this has certainly helped shape some of my thinking in more recent times. I was completely aware of the violence and the terror that was happening behind the doors of her family home. But she finally took the courageous step of stopping the situation by talking to police about the matter. Highly intelligent, successful and resilient woman, the story of her experience through the system horrified me. She was forced to give some of the most intimate details of her 25-year marriage to total strangers. Strangers who were often men, and she had to do it time and time again. She had to explain and justify her actions, as well as the abuses within her marriage repeatedly, to complete strangers, again, who were often men. Men who sometimes seemed to neither sympathise nor care. Her experience of the court system was long and protracted. It was incredibly humiliating for her. Towards the end of this process, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ken, I would never ever do this again." Now let me be clear, this is an intelligent, articulate, strong, professional woman, and she struggled with the system. Our systems and processes around this issue are sometimes so difficult and without feeling that after years of abuse and following violence, my friend did not believe that dealing with the issue through the system was worth it. Now let me ask you this. If a highly educated, professional, brave woman can't deal with our systems and processes, what does that mean for the newly arrived migrant with little or no English? Or the woman who left school at 15? Or the most vulnerable people in our community? Now let me just say about the situation I've just described. The intervention order process worked for this woman. It kept her safe and protected her from the violence. But she still found it an enormously humiliating experience. So again, this is an issue for the whole system, from the start to the end and everything in between. The system does need to be taller. It needs to have the capacity to cope with the issues, and it's struggling. But the system also needs to be broader and take into account the difficult and complex aspects, such as what do we do with the perpetrator? We all know that jail is often not the answer. The system is clearly neither big enough nor comprehensive enough to cope. Neither is it always understanding of what is happening in the family home, despite all our best efforts and the wonderful, wonderful work by so many of the people in our sector. And if we're going to make these changes, do we need to have an integrated response? It seems to me we need to find a better way to share information about risks and the safety of victims. We constantly identify gaps. Now, the Premier's promise of RAMPS funding will go some of the way to address this issue. But I ask myself, is the multidisciplinary centres that we see in the child abuse area, is that the answer? I wonder. I don't have all the answers, but forums like this can actually help me and others head off into the right direction. And now, let me just touch on another issue, the small issue of changing society and culture. How men relate to women is fundamental to everything I've been speaking about. It goes to the very heart of why some men think it's okay to treat women in an abusive way. Some of you may have read a column recently published in The Age by The Secret Footballer. He portrayed women as possessions or loot to be claimed as of right by the gods of football and used any way they see fit. But The Secret Footballer is not alone in his skewed views of masculinity. All of us in the room have seen the misogyny and disrespect some men display towards women. These attitudes hang over our community like a long, dark shadow. Some of our men learn disrespect for women from their fathers, their brothers, at school, the footy club, work, or from their mates in the pub. Wherever they learn their disrespect, though, is absolutely irrelevant. It leads fundamentally to some men finding an inherent endorsement to hit, bash and abuse women. This culture also endorses violence as an acceptable way to resolve conflict. And if you're in any doubt about that, think back to the headlines of a few weeks ago, where two mates, James Packer and David Gingell, had a brawl on the streets of Bondi. I suspect most of you saw it, you can hardly miss it. It was widely reported in the Australian media and drew comment from a wide cross-section of our community, including me. Newspapers across our country ran headlines like, "Packer packs a punch, $1 billion biffo, Packer whacker." But most inexplicably to me, Bob Katter, an experienced and long-serving politician, condoned the street fight as the Australian way. I find it absolutely astounding that such a comment from a senior politician like Katter would go unchallenged and pass largely without criticism from the Australian media. If Bob Katter can condone the street fight between Packer and Gyngell as the Australian way for settling differences, then perhaps we need to redefine the Australian way. This tolerance of male aggression goes to the heart of why some Australian men have an inability to deal with conflict, be it with a mate, be it with a wife, a child, a parent, without the need to revert to violence. This inability was again brought into stark relief for me recently by the Herald Sun. An article described the tragic case of Jeffrey Keith Impey, who killed his father with a single punch to the face during an argument. A judge said the blow had been a spontaneous reflex action and the case was tragic. It was tragic, a tragic example of a man settling his differences with violence. In my mind, the inability of some men to control their anger has directly contributed to violence against women and children in our community. I don't think there's any argument about that. So how do we actually change this culture? Do we need an advertising campaign such as the TAC have been running around road safety to change attitudes? Whatever we do, it won't be an easy task. But men in particular need to start a conversation about how we can, because it won't change itself. I know you've all heard the numbers. In 2012-13 there were approximately 61,000 recorded incidents of family violence in Victoria, more than double the rate of 2003-04. Last year there were 44 deaths in our state, 44 deaths directly attributable to family violence. 29 of those were women and 8 were children. So yes, do we have a problem? We do, and it's very real and it's very, very ugly. But these numbers, unfortunately, don't often illustrate the horror women experience living and dealing with unpredictable and violent men. They don't describe what my members see when they push open a front door. The terror-stricken faces, the blood, the broken ribs, and the traumatised children. All of us here today are searching for answers. I understand that. But we need to look no further than the victims. They speak of the abuse, they speak of the intimidation, they speak of the terror, and they speak of the bashing. They speak of the frustration of the inconsistent responses from agencies, police included, the failure to link up, the failure of the systems to sometimes protect them. So, in conclusion, let me pose some questions to the group. How can we all stand together, take collective responsibility and work harder and better to reduce this scourge in our community? Do we need to overhaul the system and boost it? Most importantly, putting the victim at the centre of everything we do. Do we need to integrate our system, share our information and co-locate better so we can work better together? But fundamental to all of this is how to change the way men in Australia relate to women. We have all felt the collective grief this year when we've read and seen cases on the front pages of our newspapers and on our televisions. Something has got to give. It will require some brave and decisive decisions from agencies, from the community and from government if we are going to stop this pain. Thank you very much.